Hello, welcome to the Officio Spotlight podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb, and thank you very much for listening. Today, I'm really excited to say that my guest on the podcast is Tom Mills, which for anybody who works in procurement, and particularly anybody who uses LinkedIn, is actually probably quite a familiar name. Tom has a long career in procurement. He's presently the head of procurement and property at Bibby Financial Services, but he's held numerous other roles, including at Clark's and at the Co-op. However, in the context of this conversation, he is something of a procurement superstar on LinkedIn. I think fast approaching now 84,000 followers when I checked this morning. And he has a newsletter which he sends out to over 13,000 subscribers. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. Actually, a little bit of context for this discussion. So one of the reasons this came about was a number of months back, you put a post out on your LinkedIn where you were talking about, I think, some of your favorite procurement podcasts. You were kind enough to mention Spotlight and procurement in that post. And it was a fascinating experience for Abby and I as a producer of this podcast, because we woke up one morning and looking at our stats on our podcast, and frankly, they'd exploded. We suddenly had loads more listeners, we had loads more followers, and we couldn't work out for the longest time exactly what had happened. And then eventually realized that you'd made that post. And I just thought it was fascinating because, here we are having plugged away at this podcast for literally years now. Officio is a name, we've got a presence in the procurement market, but actually your intervention in that was massively impactful for us. So I guess I'd like to start by how does that sit with you, that idea of being that? I mean, influence is a terrible name, but
Yeah,
I suppose having that kind of power in the market is fascinating. How does that sit with you?
thank you. It's that whole thing of responsibility, doesn't it? And I feel like, I do wince a little bit at the word influencer because I never set out to be an influencer. I just
Right.
enjoy writing and I'm passionate about procurement. So I've married the two and those have led to some growth on LinkedIn. But what I'm very keen to do is if I do have any influence through my following and through the subscribers to the newsletter is to use that in a positive way.
Right.
And the way I always position any post that I write, I always think, actually, is this helpful to my audience? So not, is this about me? Is this helpful to my audience? And is it going to support other people? And I feel that that's the big thing that sometimes people miss with social media, because the negative connotations to the word influence is that you could be potentially almost selling yourself or being sold out on what you're doing. But actually, I always think if you're making sure that your influence is positive, then it can be no
Yeah.
bad thing. And then from a purely procurement perspective, my passion lies in the fact that I've seen procurement done badly in the past, and I've got a clear view on how we need to change and progress the profession. So
Yeah.
to be able to have an audience that I can positively influence in that way feels a real privilege, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And it's great. But I am just going to rest on the fact that you used the word superstar for me. So I'm going to just enjoy that moment because I've never been called a superstar in anything I've done. So
Yeah, well, I don't know how many other procurement superstars there even are, Tom.
yeah, it's a strange field to be a superstar in, but I'll take it.
How did it come about, Tom, in terms of even your journey with LinkedIn? You mentioned you love writing. How did you get to this point where you have this level of influence within our market?
Yeah, interesting actually. So actually, it was during COVID times, the dark days of 2020, that I, for the first time in my career, actually felt, firstly, a little bit of job insecurity because I was working then in the catering industry, which effectively
Yep.
mothballed. So I found myself in a furloughed position thinking, oh my goodness, I need a network because I might need a job. Secondly, I felt disconnected, I think, as a lot of us did. So
Yeah.
there were no conferences, you weren't going for meetings, you were missing that human interaction. So I actually started by writing a couple of posts on LinkedIn because it became my way of connecting with people. And it was only through writing on LinkedIn that I realized actually a lot of what I'm saying resonates more than I expected.
Okay.
So at that point, I thought, okay, I'm onto something here, and maybe there is an opportunity to use LinkedIn in a really positive way. Being clear in terms of the journey, it was only probably 2022, maybe 2023, that I really took writing on LinkedIn seriously, because at that point I developed my newsletter.
Yeah.
And I think the difference between LinkedIn is it's short snippets. You need able to get certain bits of information across. Whereas in my newsletter, I like to give much more deep dive, more deep insights, and be really helpful. So I knew that I needed to really proactively push LinkedIn because LinkedIn is like the shop window to get people to subscribe to my newsletter. It's back to what I said at the start. I basically really enjoy writing. I've got a real passion for procurement, but procurement specifically done in the right way.
Yeah.
And I've just been able to marry the two. And I think I've always enjoyed writing, right from, I used to be creating magazines as a child for my family kind of thing. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to
Yeah.
love English at school and I loved debating. So reality is kind of being able to reignite my childhood passion and put it into something useful from a professional point of view.
Yeah. And I suppose over time that following grew. What have you seen or what have you learned from that experience in terms of what the market is looking for in terms of content and what is resonating?
Yeah, so I know it's an overused word, authenticity, but I think it's really, really important. So I
Okay.
think why my content resonates is because I always test myself before I actually write a post or send it out, publish it. Is this truly what I believe in? And this is a true reflection of me. Because those are the posts that really get the most traction. And
Okay.
taking that to a deeper level, perhaps I give away a little bit more than many people would about some of my personal struggles. So, about 10 years ago, I really suffered from severe anxiety disorder. So, being able to talk about some of the mental health impacts of being in the profession has opened up, but has helped other people open up. And so, I guess the question is in terms of the following, I feel that people feel that connection because I'm a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I'm not creating this polished, oh my goodness, I'm the perfect go-to person on procurement. We all are humans ultimately. And one of the things that I believe about procurement, and I believe so even more now that artificial intelligence is spouted on every single post that you see, is that the
Yeah.
future of procurement is about being human.
Yes.
And
Yep.
actually, it will be the emotional intelligence that differentiates procurement individuals in the future. It will be our ability to communicate, our ability to make sharp decisions, our ability to be able to influence organizations to do the right thing. Artificial intelligence will help democratize data and give perhaps a change of shape to the function, but it will be emotional intelligence which differentiates procurement professionals in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really interesting topic. Maybe we'll come back to that in a minute. Just on, it wasn't one of my other questions actually. I hadn't noticed from the post that you put out that you talk about authenticity, but you have been really honest actually, as you say, and you've kind of explained some of the good things and some of the bad things. It strikes me as incredibly brave. I'm not sure I would have the bravery necessarily to do that. Did you do that because you felt it was important for other people that might be experiencing some of the things that you've experienced?
Yeah, I did it because I thought it was important. Being honest as well, I find it quite cathartic in terms of if I'm feeling like I'm going through challenging times or I find it actually helpful to write about it and to share that. I am very conscious of the fact that, I've got a role in my current organization as a mental health first aider, and one of the things is that we should be talking more open about things, particularly important for men's health as well,
Yeah.
mental health as well. So yeah, I guess back to my point on privilege, I feel like if I've got that following, I have a duty to therefore help, and therefore, yeah, I'm kind of okay with it. I always have been quite open as a person, as an
Yeah.
individual, and I'd like to think that openness and perhaps vulnerability helps me to build deeper connections, not just within my teams, but with my stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant that you do it, and thank you, right? Because it is, procurement can be a really stressful job, right?
Yes.
And it's often doesn't get talked about so much, right? We talk about all the shiny stuff and the nice stuff.
Yeah.
It's stressful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, I was also really interested. So at this point now, I think you're approaching like 84,000 followers. Presumably that's quite global now, I guess, or is it? Or is it? No.
Yeah, there is definitely a global reach. And I noticed through my newsletter, actually, because I'm able to get some really good analytics in terms of my reach. And actually, there's a particular reach in North America that I seem to have, but there's also a real reach I seem to have in Africa, in the Middle East as well. And I've noticed that because I have my own online procurement soft skills mastery course that I've released in the last year. And the people who are coming onto that as students are actually from a
Oh,
really
okay.
diverse region. So yeah, I think it is a global audience. And I guess should be conscious of the privilege that we all have as kind of native English speakers to be able to write, but be able
Yeah.
to have such a global reach.
So the soft skills things you talked about the course you did. So we a couple of angles on that. We talked about your AI, and as you're saying,
Yeah,
this idea that AI will take away certain elements of a procurement role, but that
yeah.
arguably will make the other elements more important on that EQ piece. Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about that course, how you developed it, what it's about. 'Cause we talk a lot in our industry about soft skills, but yeah, I'd love to get
Yeah,
your view on it.
yeah. So the reason I developed that was because I really noticed that there's a plethora of opportunities for people to learn the technical skills. And obviously, it's quite expensive to be able to go through things like SIPs and to be able to do all of that. But a lot of those are very much textbook-based theories on procurement. But what I've noticed in certainly the last 5, 10 years of my career is the true differentiator for the successful procurement people are those who are able to positively influence within their organization and externally.
Right.
So I realized that I developed a core set of skills and actually some frameworks that I have used for myself that could be hugely valuable to other procurement professionals.
Okay.
So I for example, have a VPN framework, which is something that I developed for preparing for negotiations. And I thought, well, great, I've got some material here that I can help others. And I always feel like, from a point of view of the content that I produce, but also the coaching that I deliver, I wouldn't think, what do I know now that someone else might be 2 years behind me on the journey, but how can I help accelerate their careers?
Yeah.
So I love coaching, and I think that soft skills is something that is vastly underrated or under talked about within procurement as being the
Yeah.
key differentiator. So I felt that there was a gap, but actually it's something that I'm hugely passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tom, I guess another question I had, perhaps a little bit selfishly, was just your knowledge of LinkedIn is huge, right? Clearly, because you're very successful at it. Like, I'm couple of things. If people are listening to this podcast, would you encourage them to use LinkedIn more? Do you think it's a valuable tool for any procurement professional?
I think it's absolutely hugely valuable. Of course, I'm going to say that. And one of the things that I'm trying to do, and over the last year, is I've noticed some other procurement professionals starting to become really quite prolific at writing content, and I'd encourage people to do so. It really opens up connections and it opens up opportunities. Again, back to my point on me wanting to have a positive influence, I feel like we're at the start point of procurement being able to really make a name for itself, and LinkedIn is
Yeah.
just one way we can do that. But from a personal perspective, it's enabled me to get public speaking events. It enables me to come on podcasts like this. It's
Yeah.
enabled me to create some friends in areas of the world that I'd never be able to connect to normally. So
Yeah.
there's only positives that come from LinkedIn, in my view.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And although another one of my questions was, you say there's only positives, so you haven't experienced negativity again in other social media. You often hear that there's lovely upsides, but actually there's some downsides, right? Do you not? You
Yeah,
don't get that?
well, I think LinkedIn is probably the best. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. I actually did experiment about a couple of years ago with Twitter, and I decided to just come off that platform, partly because it just didn't feel like I didn't believe in the direction that Twitter or X was going, but it's
Yeah.
partly because it just felt like a negative experience. I thought, why am I doing this? But
Yeah.
you'll see there's millions of people who've made the same decision. So
Yes.
with LinkedIn, yes, you will sometimes occasionally come across troll type content or real negativity. And I am quite quick to block people if I need to. And if people aren't prepared to have debate politely, because I do encourage debate and I do recognize that I don't know it all and I need to be open-minded,
Yeah.
then if they're not able to do so in a polite way, then I'll tend to ignore the comments. I've become quite good at moving on from that. But to be honest, I wouldn't want that to put anyone off. It's, you're probably talking less than 1% of
Right. Okay.
people. So it's not a major challenge.
That's good to hear. One of the questions, so we are recording this podcast now. At some point, we will edit it and release this. We will want to get people to listen, right? What should Abby and I be thinking about when we post your podcast if we wanted to
Oh,
maximize our
amazing.
impact and our reach?
I am, by the way, you mentioned my success on LinkedIn, and of course it's because I enjoy writing and I've remained consistent. But to be really honest, I'm hugely analytical. And by
Right.
that, I don't mean I'm necessarily brilliant with Excel and things like that, but I will look at numbers. So
Yeah.
just put it in a different equation. This will feel like a tangent, but bear with me. I'm hugely into fantasy football. When I'm looking
Okay.
at fantasy football, I'm looking at the heat maps of players. I'm looking at their expected goals over the last 6 games. I apply exactly the same principles to LinkedIn. So every single
Okay.
post I create, I will check the analytics and I will tweak things to see if I can improve things. So that it means looking at the copy, how you lay out your lines, what hook you use, whether hashtags are good or not. So I'll give you some quick tips. Number one, if you are posting any video content on LinkedIn, the algorithm is starting to veer towards promoting video content, but it must be no more than 90 seconds long. Even if it's
Okay.
93 seconds long, it will tank. It's weird, but just
Wow.
don't.
Okay.
Yeah, little things like that. Second thing is don't use hashtags. The biggest content creators don't use hashtags. The hashtag thing generally has come out of social media in the last couple of years anyway, but every hashtag you put onto a post will reduce the reach by circa 7%. So why would you want to
Wow.
reduce your reach? The third thing is keep it really clear, keep it really simple, and kind of less is more, really. So to be honest, I could probably bore listeners to death in terms of telling you all the analytics, but these are things that I've learned.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We'll definitely try those, Tom. Hopefully,
Yeah.
we'll get loads of listeners to this, which would be brilliant. Conscious of time, Tom. Perhaps my last question: what does the future hold for you? So you've built this phenomenal platform, this opportunity, this voice. What are you going to do going forward?
Yeah, so an inflection point at the moment, and I was speaking before this podcast just with Abby on this. I actually have decided to leave my current role at Bippy Financial Services at the end of Q1. No bad thing. I'm actually at the end of the runway in terms of what I've delivered there, where I was brought in to set up a function.
Yeah,
I feel like I've done that. I've been there 4.5 years. I could go in several directions. I could either look for another head of role, and I am having conversations about that with a number of businesses. I
yeah,
could go into do more consultancy type work, or thirdly, I may look to really build out my business around my procurement soft skills mastery course. I know it sounds weird to not have decided yet, but I'm kind of in that thing of I'm just almost seeing what happens in terms of how fate will lead me in the direction that I need to go. But I back myself to be able to do something really good, and I want to make sure that it's good for the procurement and profession and also for me. So
that's fantastic. Well, very exciting, Tom. I back you as well. I'm sure it'll be exciting to see what you do next.
thank you.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us for the conversation today. So, like I say, fascinating to talk to you. Thanks for building the influence you have, and thanks for continuing to use it for good. And long may that
Well,
continue.
absolute privilege to be on the podcast. And I promoted your podcast simply because I think it's a really good, useful resource for people. And I love the fact that it's sort of 20, 25 minutes. You get to meet some fascinating people. So I've always enjoyed listening to you. To be actually on it now feels a privilege.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Thanks, Tom. Good luck and everything in the
Thank you.
future.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give us a click on the follow button on your chosen podcast platform. We'd also love to hear your views on either future topics or indeed if you've got any thoughts on future guests that we should look to get onto the podcast. Thanks again. See you next time.